Welcome to Nazarene, Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and in this video series we have been talking all about the feasts of the first month. And what we've seen is that on the 14th day of the first month comes the Pesach, or Passover, and after that comes the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We're trying to get rid of leaven from our houses and from our lives because it's symbolic of sin, meaning false doctrine. Well, during this Feast of Unleavened Bread, during Chag HaMatzot, there comes a very special day called Yom HaNafat HaOmer. We try to get rid of leaven by lifting up Yeshua. And what better way to get rid of leaven from our lives than lifting up Yeshua? Stay tuned for this presentation. We're going to talk about this and a whole lot more. As we said, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or the Feast of getting rid of sin, getting rid of leaven from our lives, is going to come a very special day called Yom HaNafat HaOmer, or the day of the Wave Sheaf offering. And this is the day where we get rid of sin and get rid of leaven in our lives by lifting up Yeshua, both as individuals and also as a nation. Now, we've already talked a lot in our other studies about when is the day of the Wave Sheaf offering, what are the errors about the Wave Sheaf offering that we need to avoid. So we'd like to do something different this week. Now, if you're looking for the basics, if you're looking for something that covers the basics, we're going to give you some resources here. The first resource we can recommend is a chapter in the Torah calendar study called Aviv Barley and the Head of the Year. That's going to be a study that's going to go through point for point in written format. And one of the benefits of that study is it's going to give a good general global overview of the Aviv Barley calendar in general. It'll cover all the feasts and also the Sabbath and the new moon days. Some people are looking for more detail and more information than that. So for them, we created a full video series. We also have transcripts. You can find the video series on the Nazarene Israel YouTube channel. You can also find it embedded on the Nazarene Israel website along with the transcripts. And there's 2 chapters in that full video series, or that full study. The first chapter is called Aviv Barley Simplified. It's going to cover all the information you need to know. And then the second chapter is called First Fruits or False Fruits. And that's going to point to the errors or the sin or the leaven of certain Messianic and Karaite groups that basically don't listen to our communications. Along with that, you're going to find a lot of good information in that study that's going to go through the errors or the sin or the leaven or the false doctrine, again, of certain Messianic and Karaite groups. And as long as you're on the Nazarene Israel website, there's over 20 years of studies to be found there. So if we want to get rid of false doctrine, we need to know what the true doctrine is, so we can replace the false with the true. And it's really important to replace the false with the true, especially during this week of unleavened bread, this week of getting rid of the leaven of false doctrine in our lives. Yeshua speaks about this in Matthew chapter 16, verse 6. Yeshua spoke to his disciples and said, "Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees," meaning be careful, because the false doctrine of the rabbis and the false doctrine of the Karaites, we could probably add the Messianics to this, they're really problematic because not only are they alternate doctrines, but they also establish what could be called alternate kingdoms. So how pleased is our king going to be if we set up alternate kingdoms to the one he wants us to set up? We need to avoid that, really, at all costs. We also saw in Colossians chapter 2, starting in verse 16, where the apostle Shaul, or Paul, tells us to be careful and not to let anyone but the body of Messiah, meaning the sect of the Nazarenes, therefore tell us what to do with regard to set apart meal and drink offerings, such as the Pesach, or in respect of a set apart day, such as Yom HaNafat HaOmer, the day of the Wave Sheaf offering, or even of the new moons or of the Sabbath, because these are prophetic shadow pictures of things still to come. And what they are really is they're prophetic shadow pictures of the ancient Hebrew wedding. And if we want to be there at the wedding at the right time, we need to listen carefully to the body of Mashiach tell us, and not the Karaites, and not the Pharisees, and also not the Messianics, because the Messianics are getting a lot of things wrong. They're going to miss the wedding feast. That's not something you want to do. But we want to focus not only on the leaven or the false doctrine of the Messianics and the Karaites. We also need to talk about the false doctrine or the leaven of the Pharisees. And one of the things, in fact, the leaven of the Pharisees in regards to the calendar is much more widespread because it's a pre-calculated calendar. It's much, much easier to keep. But keeping something that's wrong is not something we want to do, even if it's easier. So the thing is that the rabbis don't follow the calendar found in Torah. Instead, they follow a calendar called the Jewish calendar. It's technically called the Hillel II calendar, and it is not found in Scripture. Even the rabbis who are in the know will tell you it's not found in Scripture. And we get a lot of insight into how we got to a rabbinical calendar with a series of books called the Talmud. Now, to clarify, we do not believe the Talmud is authoritative or inspired in any way. However, the rabbis do see the Talmud as being fully authoritative, and in fact, in some cases, they'll even default to the Talmud over the Torah because they have a completely different idea about what the Torah is. Now, our understanding of the Torah is that Yahweh gave his Torah to Moshe, and then Moshe then transmitted the Torah to Israel. So our job should be to learn what the Torah says, to do the Torah as best we can, and to transmit it to others, especially because we understand that it's given to Israel as a bridal covenant. So if we want to be taken as the bride, then we need to keep the bridegroom's covenant. Period. That's it. But the rabbis don't believe that. What the rabbis believe is that Yahweh gave Moshe, or Moses, the authority to set Torah for his generation. And then Moshe laid hands on Joshua so he could establish Torah in his generation. Joshua laid hands on the judges, and so on and so forth down the line until we come to the rabbis of today. And of course, they believe that they have the authority to establish Torah for their generation today, which to us doesn't even make sense because they're making up their own bridal covenant instead of keeping the original bridal covenant of the bridegroom. Okay. Now, we see the Talmud as a valuable historical record of what the rabbis believed in ancient times, such as Yeshua's time, in the first century, in the Second Temple period. One of the things we see in the Talmud, we cover this in the Torah calendar study in the chapter on the new moon days. We show how the Talmud records that Israel was still using the original Aviv barley calendar from the days of Moshe. They were still using that in the first century, in Yeshua's time. But it began to change shortly after Yeshua's time. And then there began a slow development to whereas then they came to have the Hillel II or the Jewish calendar. But that came it was finalized perhaps some 3 centuries later. We say, well, how did we get from the original Aviv barley calendar in the first century to the Hillel II Jewish calendar? How did all that happen? Well, okay, so basics, a short history, a short crash course, is that there was always a lot of rebellion by the Hebrews, by the Jews, against the Romans. So the Romans came in, they destroyed the temple in 70 CE. Then you also had the Bar Kokhba rebellion that took place around 132 to 136 CE. And after that took place, there had been enough rebellions that the Romans basically said, okay, hold it. Enough is enough. We're not going to do this anymore. So the Romans then began exiling the Jews from the land of Israel. They couldn't go there anymore. Well, if you're exiled from the land of Israel, you have a really hard time spotting and citing and checking and verifying the Aviv barley in the land of Israel. So the calendar no longer works. So Brother Judah, much to his credit, wanted to keep something at least like the original calendar that was learned in the days of Moshe. So they needed to come up with a mathematical calendar system so they could at least approximate the sighting of the Aviv. And the way they did this was by introducing the concept of the equinox. Well, what is an equinox? An equinox means that the day and the night are of equal length. You could also say the night and the day are of equal length. So equinox means equal parts night and day. Equilux means equal parts day and night. There's a certain messianic teacher out there who teaches that no, the equinox and the equilux are different, and the equilux is from Yahweh and the equinox is from the devil. It's a very interesting gentleman. We talk about him in the study on establishing the head of the year. However, really it's the same thing. Equinox, equilux, it just means equal parts light and dark. 12 hours light, 12 hours dark, that's it. And the equinox always comes, there's two equinoxes. We have one, the vernal or spring equinox, and then we have the fall or the autumnal equinox. So you have in the summer, at the summer solstice, that's when the day is the longest, and then in the winter solstice, that's when the night is the longest, and then halfway in between, you have these periods of time when the day and the night are of equal length. And that's the spring equinox or the vernal equinox in the spring, and then the autumnal or the fall equinox in what is today called the fall. But these terms, spring and fall, do not exist in Scripture. And the term equinox and even the concept of an equinox does not exist in Scripture. So it's very interesting. So what happened is that the rabbis, because they wanted to approximate the ripening of the barley, they incorporated the concept of an equinox and they incorporated the concept of spring and fall into their calendar, what's called the Hillel II or the Jewish calendar. Now this calendar was allegedly finalized around 359 or 360 CE, so almost 3 centuries after the destruction of the temple. And it approximates the ripening of the barley because barley plants tend to ripen around that time in the land of Israel. But it's by no means precise and it's by no means accurate every year. So we have seen, in fact, we'll see again in this presentation, just last year we had the barley come ripe 6 weeks prior to the equinox. And I've also seen it come ripe, I believe, twice more. Once, there was about 3 or 4 years ago, we saw it come ripe before the equinox, and also I believe it was either 2013 or 2014, I'd have to look it up. But I personally have seen the barley come ripe or come aviv before the equinox, and more than once. And the equinox people, they don't want to hear about it, but we're going to talk about it more as this study progresses. So in our study on establishing the head of the year, we have a chapter that we did called Where is the Equinox Commanded? And in that study we said that there was a Greek astronomer, Hipparchus of Rhodes, I believe, or Hipparchus of, I forget. Anyway, so he discovered the equinox 200 and something BCE. We did a little more research. We found out, no, actually it was first discovered by a Babylonian astronomer named Kidinu circa 379 BCE. Well, Babylon, Greece, Rome, it's all the Babylonian statue. It's all the Babylonian concept. But what we need to see here is that the concept of an equinox, meaning also the concept of spring and fall, didn't even exist back when the Torah was given in the days of Moshe. So depending on who you listen to, the rabbis believe that Moshe gave the Torah around 1312 BCE, which is almost 1,000 years earlier. And some people place it even before that. They place it at 1500 or 1600 BCE. So what we're saying here is the concept of an equinox didn't even exist. It was not known until almost 1,000 years or more after the giving of the Torah in the wilderness. So, what I'm saying here, if we find ourselves using terms that aren't even found in Scripture, then that's a good indication that something is wrong and we need to re-examine our theology. We're going to see other terms. So if you're using the term equinox, spring, fall, harvestable fields, intercalation, these terms are not found in Scripture. And there's a good reason they're not found in Scripture. So that's something to be aware of. During this week, we're trying to get rid of leaven or false doctrine or sin. Now, in our study on establishing the head of the year, we also had another chapter called Where is Spring Commanded? Very similar concept, but slightly different information. One of the things is that the rabbinical calendar talks a lot about the spring and fall feasts, and you can hear a lot of messianics also talk about the spring and fall feasts. Shouldn't do that, because there is no spring or fall or equinox in Scripture. In Scripture, we only have summer and winter. That's it. So again, if we're using terms that Scripture never uses, why are we doing that? So, again, we've seen that we will see later, the barley often ripens before the spring equinox. I personally have seen it at least 3 times in 20 years. And so what we need to know from this is, while the Hillel II or the rabbinical calendar or the Jewish calendar, it does a fair, more or less job of approximating the average date of the barley ripening, it is not reliable in any given year, because, again, I personally have seen the barley come ripe 3 times in the last 20 years. That's not good enough for Yahweh. So we say again, well, what if you're interested to know more, you say, what's going on with this equinox thing? There's a chapter in the book study we can recommend. So go to the Nazarene Israel website, or I believe you can also purchase it on Amazon.com at our cost. There's a study called The Equinox Error, and it's found in Nazarene Scripture Studies, Volume 2. And this basically, we go through some of the entries in the Talmud, and we decode or unpack these references, and we show how the Talmud records the secret history, so to speak, of how the spring equinox was slowly brought into the calculations, what the rabbis call the intercalation of the head of the year. And again, there's a certain messianic barley searcher who he likes to use the term intercalation, even though it's not used in Scripture. He has some very, shall we say, interesting theology that we would recommend avoiding, because these terms are adding. They're not necessary. You don't need them to do things Yahweh's way, or Yahweh would use them. So when you hear someone using terms Yahweh doesn't use, red alert, red flag. That's something we shouldn't be doing. Okay, we are doing this recording in 2022. This is a perfect example of why the equinox doesn't work. This is from last year, 2021. Now, on the 6th of February, 2021, a believing sister who lives in the land of Israel, her name is Becca Bitterman, she found Aviv barley in sufficient quantities for a wave sheaf. I'd have to check the dates to get exact, but I believe it was right around 6 weeks before the spring equinox. So again, the spring equinox is absolutely not a reliable indicator of when the barley is going to become Aviv. It just simply is not. So what we need to do in the balance of this study is we're going to talk about basically 3 things that the rabbinical calendar gets wrong. So the first is, like we just said, it's a pre-calculated, man-made calendar that relies on the equinox, which is not reliable. It doesn't exist in Scripture. We already said that. Okay, second thing that's wrong is the wave sheaf is always going to be offered on the 15th day of the first month, instead of offering the wave sheaf offering on the first day of the week, 15 to 21 days after the new moon of the Aviv. And the third problem is this also causes the Pentecost to get thrown off. We're going to talk about these things next, and we're also going to see it again next week when we talk about the Pentecost or Shavuot. So let's look at the commandment to know why the Pharisaic calendar is wrong. So we come to Leviticus, or Vayikra, chapter 23, starting in verse 10, and Yahweh says, "Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest." We're talking about the barley first fruits here, the Omer offering. And he says, "He shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted on your behalf. On the day after the weekly Sabbath, the priest shall wave it." And in context, he's talking about the day after the weekly Sabbath in which the Passover or the Pesach falls. And we're going to see that in just a moment. So we know that Yom HaNafat HaOmer, or the day of the wave sheaf offering, takes place 15 to 21 days after the new moon of the Aviv is seen. So the new moon of the Aviv, or Rosh Hashanah, in this example, takes place on the first day of the week. We count 14 days to the Passover. Passover in this case falls on Shabbat. So the Passover and Shabbat take place on the same day. And then the day after the Sabbath of the Passover week comes Yom HaNafat HaOmer. Okay, so that's one way to do it. That's 15 days later. Now let's take a look at 21 days later. In example number 2, Rosh Hashanah falls on the second day of the week. So we wait 14 days, we come to the Passover, but this time Passover is on the first day of the week. Well, the Shabbat takes place on the Shabbat, of course, but that's the Shabbat of the Passover week, so we wait a day, and that's when the Omer offering is, on the 21st day after the new moon. So once again, 15 to 21 days after the new moon. Well, it all depends on when the new moon is seen. Now, for another example, we're going to take a look at the way the situation was in the first century when Yeshua was killed. Now, this is a very common scenario. It's going to take place about 1/7 of the time. So in this instance, the new moon is seen on the 5th day of the week, or a Thursday, and then we count 14 days later. The Pesach takes place on the 4th day of the week, in the middle of the week, and then we count an additional 4 more days to get to Yom HaNafat HaOmer. Okay, so we know that Yeshua was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights, the sign that was given to Jonah, and then he was raised either on the Sabbath or as the Sabbath was coming to a close and turning into the first day of the week. That's when Yeshua was raised. Now, the new moon of the Aviv can also take place on any day of the week. It can take place on first day, second day, third, fourth, fifth, sixth day, or again, it can fall on the Shabbat. It's going to have, on average, statistically, a likelihood of happening about 1/7 of the time on any given day. So let's take a look at the way things were in the first century. So this is the way things were in the year that Yeshua was cut off during the middle of the week. We see that the new moon of Rosh Hashanah, or the new moon of the Aviv, was sighted on the 5th day of the week. We count 14 days later, and we have the Pesach offering. And here we have the Pesach on the 14th, during the middle of the week, when Yeshua was cut off. But look, the rabbis are going to offer their Omer the very next day. So then you try to talk to someone and you say, well, see, Yeshua fits the pattern. Yeshua was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights, and then he was raised either on the Sabbath or as the Sabbath was turning into the first day of the week. And the rabbinical calendar person says, but no. The Wave Sheaf is offered the day after the Pesach, on the 15th day of the first month, on the first day of unleavened bread. You see, therefore, the rabbinical calendar person says, Yeshua doesn't match the pattern at all. And so one has to wonder, what do all the Messianic Jews do with this? How do the Messianic Jews reconcile the fact that Yeshua represents the Omer, but in the rabbinical calendar the Omer is offered the very next day? How do the Messianics, how do they do that? It's a good question. So the thing is, the rabbis would be offering the Omer while Yeshua was still in the grave. And not only that, because the Wave Sheaf offering affects the Pentecost is also affected. We're going to talk about that next week. Okay, so let's take a good look at the command for the Omer count, because we're going to see this again. This is going to impact next week's study also. So here we have the command for the Omer count in Leviticus or Vayikra chapter 3, starting in verse 15. And Yahweh says, "You shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath." And in context, he's talking about the weekly Sabbath. So count for yourselves from the day after the weekly Sabbath, from the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, meaning from the day you brought the wave sheaf offering on Yom HaNafat HaOmer. He says 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. So you're going to count 7 weeks. Okay, so he says count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall offer a new grain offering to Yahweh. So we're going to see later, we're going to see that's the black heirloom emmer wheat, and that comes ripe at a very specific time. the first fruits of the wheat come ripe about 50 days after the first fruits of barley. So what Yahweh is saying is count 7 weeks, count 7 Sabbaths, and then add a day, so you're still on the first day of the week, and then you're going to have a new grain offering of wheat unto Yahweh. We're going to talk about that next week. Let's take a look at this in more details. Let's take a look at verse 15 again. We're going to see where the rabbis go off the rails with this thing. So Yahweh says, and you shall count for yourselves from the day after the weekly Sabbath, and the Hebrew there is Mimaharet HaShabbat. Okay, so Shabbat, after the Sabbath. So you shall count for yourselves from the day after the weekly Sabbath, Mimaharet HaShabbat, from the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, the Omer. Then he says, 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. And the Hebrew there is Sheva Shavatot. So, okay, so 7 Sabbaths, Sheva Shabbatot. So, what is the question? Now, but the rabbis are going to go a totally different direction with that. The rabbis are going to say, Mimaharet HaShabbat. They're going to say the Shabbat here refers to the Pesach, because they're going to say, well, Passover is a kind of a rest day. Therefore, the Pesach is a kind of a Shabbat. So that's what they're going to do with that. So they're going to offer their wave sheaf offering the day after the Pesach, no matter what day of the week the Pesach falls on. Okay, well, that's wrong. We're going to see 4 main reasons why that's wrong. Okay, and the very first reason is Pesach is not Shabbat. You know, Yahweh is perfectly capable of saying Pesach if he wants to say Pesach, and Shabbat if he wants to say Shabbat. There's no reason not to believe him, and there's no reason not to take him at his word here. So if Yahweh had said to offer the Omer on the day after the Pesach, he would have said Mimaharet HaPesach. But he doesn't say Mimaharet HaPesach. He says Mimaharet HaShabbat. So is there some reason that we don't believe Yahweh? Is there some reason we don't want to do what he says to do? So, you know, what I was taught is that rule number 1 of scripture interpretation, no matter what else you do, rule number 1 is never, ever, ever violate the peshat, what's called the peshat, or the face value of the text. Never, ever, ever violate the peshat. Elsewise, you can come up with all kinds of strange doctrines and things out of that. Rule number 2, okay, we need to talk about the instructions for the first day of unleavened bread. Okay, now if Yahweh had wanted us to offer the Omer on the first day of unleavened bread, he would have given us the instructions along with the instructions for the first day of unleavened bread, because both of those things would have fallen together. But he didn't give us the instructions for the wave sheaf offering when he gave us the instructions for the first day of unleavened bread. He gave them separately. They're given in 2 separate places. And one of the reasons we know that's not a mistake is also because the first day of unleavened bread has a calendar date fixed to it. The Pesach takes place on the 14th of the first month. The first day of unleavened bread takes place on the 15th of the first month. But Elohim never sets a date for the day of the wave sheaf offering. He also never sets a date for Shavuot, because these are supposed to be celebrated on the first day of the week, but the calendar date can change. Even though it's the first day of the week, it's not always the 15th of the first month. Do you understand what I'm saying? So to continue, so if Yahweh wanted us to offer the Omer on the first day of unleavened bread, he would have said, offer the Omer on the first day of unleavened bread. Offer the Omer on the 15th day of the first month. He would say, offer the Omer on the day after the Pesach. But he didn't do that. He gave the instructions separately, and one of them has a calendar date and the other one doesn't. So reason number 4 is the principle that we're supposed to use what's called equal weights and measures. If you're going to do one thing in one instance, you should do the same thing in the other instance. If it doesn't make sense to use it in the other instances, we shouldn't use it in this instance. So the problem here is that if we're going to be consistent and we're going to substitute in the word Passover for the word Shabbat, if we're going to do that uniformly in Leviticus 23 verses 15 and 16, then what it tells us to do is it tells us to hold the Pentecost after 7 Passovers have been completed. Meaning we're going to have to wait 7 years to offer the Pentecost. Now, obviously that doesn't work. Okay, now let's take a look. If we're going to substitute in uniformly, if we're going to use equal weights and measures, this is what we call the rabbinical nonsense version. So he says, and you shall count for yourselves, this is the rabbinic version, if you count for yourselves from the day after the Pesach, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave sheaf offering, 7 Pesachim, or 7 Passovers, shall be completed. He says, count 50 days to the day after the 7th Pesach, then you shall offer a new grain offering to Yahweh. Well, clearly that doesn't work because it's referring to a 7-year time frame rather than a 50-day time frame. You can't count 50 days to some event that takes place 7 years from now. That just simply doesn't work. So it doesn't work. The rabbinical interpretation is leaven. It's false doctrine. It's sin. And we're going to see how that leaven and we're going to see how that false doctrine plays out during the pilgrimage feast of Hag Shavuot, or the pilgrimage feast of weeks. Stay tuned and please join us for that. Shalom.